Welcome to everyone. We're so glad that you are with us tonight for the Spirit of Juneteenth celebration and discussion. I'm Matt Hartley, and I'm the board president for the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida. We are an organization that's committed to being a beacon for interfaith engagement and pluralism in Northeast Florida. We are committed to doing programs like this that build connections across culture, across religion, with religious and non-religious people as well, so that we can seek justice together, so that we can seek a better world and a better community, a better Jacksonville and Northeast Florida together. So we thank you for being with us, and I want to thank all of our panelists for responding to the call, to being a part of this, to Will for sharing the beautiful music with us, and to my co-host Od'Juan. We're grateful to each one of you for being a part of this. So we're here to talk about Juneteenth. So I'm going to throw things to my friend, Dr. Rudy Jamison from UNF.
I want to thank Matt Hartley and the Interfaith Center for organizing this space. I think Juneteenth, particularly here in Northeast Florida, has not been recognized enough. So I'm extremely appreciative to be in this space with you all. And hopefully all of the things that we share will land on us in the spirit of hope, love, courage, and agency. Thanks to the organizers for thinking enough of me to have me share some ideas with you. And I wanna share just the idea of Juneteenth and what it means, and the context is coming from Juneteenth.com. And I want you to consider this information, or look at this information through the lenses of our economic institutions and our political institutions. Once again, I'd like for you to consider this information and look at it through the lens of our economic institution, which is capitalism, and our political institution, which is democracy. And then I'll have a few things to say after sharing the information. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with the news that war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. Note that this is 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which had become official January 1st, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation had little impact on the Texans due to the minimal number of Union troops to enforce the new executive order. However, with the surrender of General Lee in April of 1965 and the arrival of General Granger's regiment, the forces were finally strong enough to influence and overcome the resistance. Later, attempts to explain this 2.5-year delay in the receipt of this important news have yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas and with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And still another is that federal troops actually waited for slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. All of which, or none of these versions, could be true. Certainly, for some, President Lincoln's authority over the rebellious states was in question. Whatever the reasons, conditions in Texas remained status quo well beyond what was statutory. The restrictions to the profound news ranged from pure shock to immediate jubilation. While many lingered to learn of this news, employer to employee relationship, many left before these offered completely off the lips of other former masters. A range of activities were provided to entertain the masses. Many of them continue as traditions today. Rodeos, fishing, barbecuing, and baseball are just a few of the types of Juneteenth activities that you may witness. Juneteenth almost always focuses on education and self-improvement. Thus, often guest speakers are brought in and the elders are called upon recount to the events of the past. Prayer services were also a major part of these celebrations. So I ask you to look at this through the lens of our economic and political institutions. And I ask you that because particularly in the socio-cultural climate of today, we have a lot of resistance of everyone acknowledging structural and institutional racism. And if we look at this through our economic system of capitalism, during slavery, slavery was the economic institution that built capitalism in America. So when we think about it from an economic perspective, very similar arrangements occur today. When we talk about the stock market was built on capitalism, on the backs of slaves. And when we look at capitalism and its speculative ideologies, right? We can see a thread from 1863 to 2020. And in my mind, we have a political system that sits inside of an economic system. Once again, we have a political system that sits inside of an economic system. Because in today's society, our political system is driven by capitalism. It's driven by an open market of competitive exchange. And when we talk about structural and institutional racism, the architects of democracy, the architects of capitalism, believed in this institution of slavery and free market and competition. But when we talk about a political system, it's more of an egalitarian ideology. We talk about freedom, justice, equity, equality. And those two institutions have competing commitments. So my question to you is, as we think about Juneteenth and its implications on 2020, how do we wrestle with the competing commitments of our political system of democracy sitting inside of an economic system of capitalism in search of racial equity and social justice? Once again, how do we wrestle with a political system of democracy sitting inside of an economic system of capitalism in search of racial equity and social justice? Thank you for listening. We have a Q&A lined up for you, and I'm very interested to hear all of your thoughts. And now we're here from the beautiful voice of Wilford Kelly again.
Okay, this one is Amazing Grace. In my experiences with Juneteenth, this is certainly a song that's been omnipresent, and once again, I invite you to sing along on mute. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear grace appear. The I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
So just to give you an idea of how this discussion will go, we're so grateful for everyone who's joined as a participant. We're going to have some just panel discussion to start with, but then we will open up to our whole group to ask questions or share comments and connections that you're making as we come to the end of our event a little later on. I did want to share with you a couple of articles that have been really helpful for me. There's one from 2018 that I read about Juneteenth, and I'm putting it in the chat box there. And it's an interview. It's written by a Black woman, but she's also interviewing a Black man who is a professor at University of Oklahoma, and they're talking about the significance of Juneteenth. So that's a great one to read. And then there's another one here, and some of you may know this, but Teen Vogue has actually become this incredible source for news and justice commentary. But this other article is by a young Black woman, and it's kind of an explainer on Juneteenth. So a couple of resources if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the history. So with that, we're going to move into our panel discussion, and our first question is going to serve as a way of allowing our panelists to introduce themselves as well. So this is a question that all of our panelists will answer, and as you do it, panelists, just introduce who you are to our participants tonight. So here's our first question. What work have you been doing, and how do you see it connected to the spirit of Juneteenth with freedom marching on?
I'm Kiara, Alexis. I am a dialysis technician during the week. I'm a college student, and I'm a community activist. I first kind of started getting into activism. It's always been something that's with me because that comes along with, being Black. But I started getting into it when I went to downtown. I'm from the west side of Jacksonville, and so when I lived on the west side and I went to Jefferson Davis, I kind of stayed on the west side in that area. I know a lot of people who share those similar stories. If they live on the north side, they're probably just going to stay within that area. If they live on the west side, they're probably just going to stay within that area. It's kind of, if you're there, you stay in your community. And so when I went to Douglas Anderson, I went there for theater, Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. I started seeing different sides of Jacksonville that I had never seen before, like places that I didn't know existed, like San Marco or San Jose or Ponte Vedra or like Town Center and stuff. I don't know why, I just never really went over there. And so I found out about the downtown library. And when I went to the downtown library, they had the African American collection, which is on the 4th floor. And I went in there and I saw so many public figures that were Black that made a lot of change from Jacksonville. They just had them posted all over their walls. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I can't believe that I went through these schools and I never learned any of that. You know, I went to a place called Jefferson Davis, you know, like I took that in, and I had a great librarian. His name is John. He works at the Downtown Public Library. Shout out to John. He walked me through the library and talked with me about things, and any questions that I had, he would answer them. And I went to it was a book review by, I'm not sure the name of the author, but they were basically talking about American Beach and just how it was the first Black beach and just the history and the significance of it. And I was just thinking, you know, these are stories that I would love for my community that doesn't know much about this history. I would love for them to know about this. And so I talked with John, and we were able to start a book club there called The Perspective. And so I was able to meet a lot of different people there. And the majority of the attendants were actually the homeless that are living around downtown. And it was veterans like that were homeless that were living there. And I was able to hear stories about Vietnam that, you know, I wasn't really introduced into, and just, you know, how that's affected the community, and just how a lot of Vietnam veterans are homeless, which is different from this idea of nationalism, you know, that everyone is involved in. It makes you wonder, what is nationalism, you know? And so then after that, I started looking into community organizations that were focusing on bettering the community, and I found Jax Takes Action. And it was like confirmation, because I had been reading so much, and I've been getting connected with so many people in the library, different people in the community, and I hadn't really bonded with Jacksonville in the way that I had, you know, when I went downtown. Like, I feel like downtown should be more of a hub, because the type of conversations that I was able to make just based off of the small events that were going on downtown, some things are always going on there, but I'm not sure everyone is able to get there. Everyone doesn't have access to that. So I would love if Jacksonville had more access to downtown, so more people can mingle and meet and be able to share conversations and stories, because I think that's what also pushed me into activism more. But Jax Takes Action, they had different community events that would bring people together in this fight for police accountability, you know, and they just talk about the city's budget being 40% of, you know, to police. And you just go and you think about that, and you look at the North Side, which they just started talking about how, you know, it has been left just dying, no funding going there. And now they're saying they want to do urban development specifically for that. But it just makes you wonder why all this time nothing has been there, you know? And so just things like that. I started a podcast. First episode was just focusing in on capitalism. And then I've just been educating myself so I can be a soldier in this fight for justice.
And it is such a pleasure to be here. So I'm speaking to you actually from St. Augustine. I am the pastor of First United Methodist Church in St. Augustine. For those who are familiar with the area, I'm on the corner of King and Riberia, and those who are in the city, it's known as the Pumpkin Church. And so I think it's important for me to share with you that I am second career pastor, and before that, I was a journalist. And so I enter into my vocation as a pastor with this love of storytelling. And so having grown up in Jacksonville, I grew up on the north side. So when Kiara talks about different sides of the town, I grew up on the north side of Jacksonville and returned home in 2016. And when I returned home, I did some work around church planting and then was appointed by the United Methodist Church to St. Augustine, to First Church. And certainly that was a historic day for me to be appointed there because I became the first African-American pastor, also the first female. My church is moving toward 200 years old. We are 190, I think we're 196 years old. So there's a lot of history there. And as I was sharing with some of the other panelists, one of the bits and pieces of our history is that in the late 1960s, our church was the church. Not only did King march around our church, or at least I wouldn't say march, but not only did he walk around the grounds of the church, I learned praying while he was there, but praying around the grounds of this church. But he was also familiar with this church because my church, unfortunately, was the United Methodist Church that denied the admittance of a young woman and some children who wanted to come and worship on a Sunday morning. So my church has pretty much kind of lived with this history. It is not a history, of course, that they are proud of. The woman was arrested on that day. There were a lot of nasty words that were shared from the white men who gathered on the porch and the portico of the church, locked arms and refused to admit them in. I have some members who are still there who remember that day. But certainly today, part of what I'm trying to do there is really share a little bit about who I am. And so I think there's something in us learning each other's stories, right? There's something about me being able to be in the space and I am able to address maybe myths, stereotypes, biases that people may have heard. I am there to be able to share myself and share also who we all are as this body of people who belong to God, and how our lives intersect with this story of God. And so what I often find myself doing is sharing a little bit about what it was like for me to grow up on the north side of Jacksonville, sharing bits and pieces of my life. Since I've been in St. Augustine, I've had this opportunity to begin this work with my colleague, Pastor David Williamson, who is at Grace United Methodist Church. Grace United Methodist Church is the Northern Church, or it was known as the Northern Church. My church was known as the Southern Church, and is very, very much attended by those who are from St. Augustine, from that area. And Pastor David and I, for the past 2 years, actually, we've been leading dangerous, or what I would say courageous, conversations around race. And we are meeting on Tuesdays from noon to about 1:15, 1:30. Right now, because we're in the season of COVID, we're meeting on Zoom. And typically we have between 25 to maybe 30 people who are from the area of St. Augustine, as well as those who are snowbirds who are coming in. And we've built this relationship. And so we have conversations, honest conversations, since we've been moving for 2 years. Now, we're at the point we can say some things. We can be really honest about what we're dealing with and what we have experienced. And so certainly in this right now season, this has been a very beautiful opportunity for us to put our learnings to work. So not only are we having these conversations, but we've also engaged in learning how to be anti-racist. A number of our people have gone through training, where we were in training with a number of people from across the community for about a week. and all day training. You're talking about 9 to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon for about a week. And so now is the time that we're able to put those things that we've been talking about into work. And so we are meeting with city officials. There's a meeting on Monday where we will hear a little bit more about their decisions around the Confederate monuments. We're having a number of protests. Those persons are participating. We are engaging in conversations with the police chief, as he is working on right now, providing cameras, body cams. And so we're just really having a lot of those conversations. What I do find very interesting, though, is, so I'm pastoring this church, and we're not fully there yet. Not everyone in my church is fully there just yet. And that's really okay. But still, there is this call to community. And so that's pretty much kind of the work that I'm doing right now.
Thanks, Reverend Juana Jordan. We appreciate you being with us and sharing your story. Next, we will go to Will Kelly, and Will will share a little bit about his work.
Well, hello everyone. As you've just heard, my name is Wilford Kelly. I was born in Plantation, Florida, and lived in Miami until I was 6, moved to Delray, then my family moved to Plantation, and I moved to Jacksonville. My experience has been one that has been filled with education. My mother, when I was born, she was an English honors teacher, and there was the homework that I had from school, and there was the homework that I had from my mom. She was very insistent upon me learning about my heritage and the struggles and the hardship that, you know, the people before me went through in order for me to have the opportunities that I do today. I will just share one specific one. So there's this one box set that came with a book and like a long VCR set called Free at Last. And it covered the 40 lives that we lost within the civil rights movement. And I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it really had an impact on me because I'd never seen that side of, I guess, humanity. I was very, very, very young, and at that point I was in many environments that were mostly white. And so, you know, that can expose you to some things, but also protect you from some things. So I always struggled with the realization that there was so much hardship and so much pain that came from the history of my skin color. So, and of course, I'll always be grateful to her for teaching me about my heritage, because it always taught me that, you know, I can't ever just be complacent in life. You know, I've always got to be striving for greatness and making sure that the people around me are educated about what's going on in this world and keeping myself in the know. So since I've moved on to San Francisco, because I lived in Jacksonville for 4 years, I did my undergrad at the University of North Florida, majoring in music, concentration in vocal performance. When I moved out here, I made a pact with myself that I would always make sure that the music of Black artists and composers would certainly always be in my wheelhouse. I've never presented a recital that did not have a musical selection that was written by a Black composer. I was very involved in the Black Student Union at my school that I just graduated from last month with my master's. That was really cool. And one thing that I've always learned is that there are a lot of people are very willing to have a conversation. You just have to be open and come with the armor of God because they will spew a lot of craziness and stuff like that. But you have to stand firm in who you are, and I can attribute that to what my mom instilled in me when I was younger. And especially in the era of classical music, you know, it's a field that really isn't ours if you think about it. It's a mostly European art form with history that's certainly become a little bit more mixed as time has gone on. But I will honestly say that I've always felt like an underdog. But one thing about musicians is that just about everybody is aware of the hardships. It's just a matter of making sure that your community is aware of the hardships that plague our Black community, because they will overlook us otherwise. One thing that I found out was that a lot of people consider Black classical musicians as like a novelty. They expect us to sing gospel and just go away. And that was something that I struggled with. I had a lot of imposter syndrome and stuff like that. And I realized that the way that I could handle that and deal with that was to open dialogues and have open conversations with my colleagues and with my teachers about the fact that I want to be respected just as, my white counterparts are respected in this art form, and be much more resolute in who I am as a human being. And it even helped me this past month, I came out as gender fluid. It helped me become more aware of what my gender identity was, being resolute in who I am and leaning into my Blackness and realizing that, Blackness is greatness. So I believe that's a good thing on what I've shared.
All right. Yeah, it is. Thank you, Will. Blackness is greatness.
Thank you.
Od'Juan, do you want to share a little bit about just what work you do and how you see it, on this theme of freedom marching on?
I said earlier, my name is Od'Juan Whitfield with Faith in Public Life. I'm going to be quite honest. I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was not totally aware of what here in Jacksonville about 14, 15 years ago. Since that time, though, I have really been educated and inspired by Juneteenth and its celebration and its story and how it came about, and just celebrating, African Americans within this country, and in particularly the South. Hopefully, one day it could migrate to the nation. As a great celebration, not just for African Americans, but for this country, and the great step forward of this country that we all acknowledge. Just as Dr. Jamison said earlier about how the whole story of Juneteenth and how it was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that those slaves in Texas were even read the Declaration. And two things that I thought was interesting about that is, one, the celebration does not start until they're free. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation happened 2 years earlier, we do not rejoice and celebrate until they're free. And it was amazing to me because, coming to present day, I feel like freedom has still been withheld in a lot of our economic, whether it's in our economic development, whether it's in companies, in our capitalist society, in social justice, in our judicial system, in every system in the United States, freedom is still withheld in some degree. And I cannot wait until that great glorious day that we all can celebrate, when everybody is free from all of these systemic racism that is within each and one of our systems here in the United States. And so the more I begin to learn about Juneteenth and just what it meant, and giving this day and everything that's happening around the United States, around the world, I think it not be a coincidence that around the world, everybody can, no matter what language, no matter what culture, everybody can tap into what it's like to be oppressed. And in every language spoken and in every culture that is expressed throughout the world, can connect with what's going on here in the United States and say, we need freedom. Yes, we need it, and we need it now. Justice, we need it, and we need it now. And so I just think that's fascinating, and I'm blessed and honored to be just a part of this.
Od'Juan, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was actually 2.5 years. I can only imagine 6 months as a slave.
Yeah.
So we don't want to discount.
You're right. You're right. 2.5 years.
That's right. 2.5 years.
Doctor.
Yeah. So I didn't give you my introduction when I gave you the context. I'm Rudy Jamison. I'm a native of Jacksonville, Florida. I grew up out east in the historic East Side, and which is probably still one of the most impoverished, ignored, marginalized communities in Jacksonville. And I'm proud. That's probably the proudest time. That's probably the time that I'm most proudest of, is being able to overcome all of the barriers that comes along with growing up in a neighborhood like that. I'm a proud product of the Duval County Public School System. I'm a proud graduate of Jean Ribault Senior High School on the north side. So I followed the basketball around. And whoever had the best team in the city, I went and took me a spot. I started out east, and we lost to Cougar Park in the finals by 40 points. I rode my bike from 4th Street to 21st when it took me a spot. Northwestern Junior High School hadn't lost a game. I caught 2 buses every day to junior high school to play basketball and took me a spot. Ribault was going to the state finals every year, so I caught 2 buses from out east every year and went over there and took me a spot. So there's probably not a crevice in Jacksonville where I am not welcome. And I say that proudly. I'm also a proud graduate of Florida A&M University and the University of North Florida. I currently work in the Center for Urban Education, and I am faculty in the College of Education and Human Services at UNF. And the work that I do spans across all type of community initiatives and urban education initiatives. So I just want to mention a few of them. I believe that education is the key, and not just formal education, right? Universal education. Because I sit in the juxtaposition between a Booker T. Washington and a W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm a fan of the talented 10th, but that's separatism in and of itself, right? I think Booker T. Washington was on to something when he talked about learning trades, right? I believe that trades persons can achieve a level of prosperity that some of us highly educated college degree people will never realize, right? So I sit in that juxtaposition. I direct a program called the Urban Education Scholars Program, where I recruit historically underrepresented students from lower socioeconomic groups who are interested in pursuing careers in education. I put them on scholarship. I currently have 2 cohorts recruited. That's 18 students. So my first cohort is a group of 8 men, 7 Black males, 1 Hispanic male. Over the past 10 years, UNF's College of Education has not graduated over 7 Black males from Duval County. I have 7 in 1 cohort. That's the alpha cohort. The beta cohort is 8 African-American females, 1 Black male, and 1 Hispanic male. They'll begin in the fall. My dream is in 2023 to have those 8 males marching across the stage, entering into the profession of education, and have 40 in the pipeline ready to change the world. And I think it's extremely important for us to start to prepare more culturally responsive teacher educators to meet the needs of our Black and brown, poor children and families, right? I'm a firm believer that education does not end outside of those school walls at 2:30 or 4:30 or whenever the time school ends. I think education and community is synonymous. I often say, those students have a group of teachers from 8 to 4, but from 4 to 8, they got another group of teachers, and they're teaching an entirely different curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that we are informing both of those milieus. some of the other projects I'm working on, I am one of my mentors and sponsors and dear friends is Rodney Lawrence Hurst Sr. Rodney Hurst was at 16 years old, led the 1960 sit-ins in Jacksonville, Florida, in downtown Jacksonville. On August 27th, 1960, there were a group of white men in Confederate uniforms on Hogan Street, adjacent to Hemming Park, passing out free axe handles to over 200 plus white men downtown, who commenced to beating up 38 plus high school NAACP Youth Council students, right? And that day is known as Axe Handle Saturday. Rodney Hurst wrote the only chronicled evidence of those events in a book called It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke.
That was the first book that we read for the book club.
It was never about a hot dog and a Coke. So we are currently in preparation for the 60th commemoration of Axe Handle Saturday, and that is going to be the exact same day that Donald Trump gives his acceptance speech here in Jacksonville. We have secured Hemming Park as a location. It will be there from 11 to 4, and then we'll proceed to the East Side Brotherhood on Jesse and A. Philip Randolph in the neighborhood that I grew up in, where a mural has been installed called the Hope and History Mural Project, and it is a mural project of Axe Handle Saturday. In 2018, we convened 25 plus high school students from various schools around Duval County and surrounding areas, took them through a year of curriculum instruction around the 1960 sit-ins and Axe Handle Saturday, and they selected what would go on that building with the members of the East Side Brotherhood. And it was amazing to see the sense of agency they gained in terms of social justice and racial equity. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that project. And lastly, I think the president, David Thomas, who's the president of Morehouse College, put out an article, I think 2 weeks ago, and he talked about how most organizations in the United States are ill prepared to have this race/racism conversation. And he submitted that if at the heads of all of those organizations, we were to chart what he calls their developmental network, their mentors and their sponsors in the world of work who have been most influential to their development and their proteges that they are developing, we would not find African Americans in that space, which means that the African American perspective is absent within the leadership of those organizations, right? So, and as human beings, we all practice what is called homosocial reproduction, homophily. We gravitate to, we befriend, we hire, we promote, we develop people who look and act like us. And if at the top of every industry in America is a white man, where do people of color get access to the information, to the resources, to the relationships in order to be developed? A perfect example for me is in the sports and entertainment industry, right? Sports are over 80% African American with minimal, if any, major ownership, right? And that says one of two things. Either we are being denied the opportunity to own those professional organizations, or something is wrong with us and we don't know how to own those organizations. And I posit to you today that the only thing wrong with Black folk is America thinks something is wrong with Black folk. And that includes some Black folk, right? So I say all of that to say, Rodney Hurst and I have co-authored a book, and the blue line copy should be here no later than Saturday. I'm extremely excited about that. And we should have book in hand no later than middle of July. The title of that book is Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development. So please be on the lookout for that and us having conversations about that. Earlier, Reverend Juana Jordan talked about the conversations that they're having. I think that's extremely important. I also work with the Community Remembrance Project, which is in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama. And the Equal Justice Initiative, where the lynching museum and memorial is right now, has partnered with every county in the South to identify every lynching that took place, number one, put a marker up in the vicinity of where each of those lynching took place in every county, number two. And number three, bring a monument to every county that's a replica of what's sitting in the memorial right now. So in Jacksonville, there were 8 lynchings. We have already done 2 soil sample collections. And Juana, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the St. John's event where they stole the marker. And that was the first marker to be installed in the state of Florida, right? Yes. So I mean, that's demonstrative evidence that we are resistant to dealing with this conversation called race and racism. But I'm committed to not only having the conversation, but shifting the thought, the emotions, the affect, and the behaviors of people because they think, feel, and behave differently because we are in deeper relationship with each other.
Yeah, and I would invite anybody and everybody who has not gone to the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, to do so. I've been there 3 times, and every time you got to bring tissue. I'm telling you, to see all of those names of all of those people who have just been lynched, from babies to senior citizens, just because the color of their skin.
Yeah, 904 is the organization that has partnered with the Equal Justice Initiative, and there is open involvement. So you can join the steering committee, and the mission of 904 is to have 80% of the Jacksonville population visit the museum and memorial. The memorial chronicles the lynchings, but the museum chronicles the evolution of injustice from slavery to mass incarceration, and shows you the thread running through every sustained institution, throughout those inequities.
Yes. Yeah, definitely need tissue for that museum too. But the first time when I walked in there and that hologram of the slave woman singing, chills through your whole body.
The kids, Od'Juan, saying, "Have you seen my mother?"
Oh, yes. You guys need to go. It's like one of those episodes of a movie that everybody hasn't seen. Like, you guys need to go. I'm telling you, it would bless your soul. It really will. I want to jump into a question, and I want to tap Kiara or Alexis' shoulder on this particular question, because I'm very interested, in particularly because it's been the young people in this movement, right? It's been a lot of energy, a lot of protest, and it has really stemmed from the young people. And that's not really surprising though, right? Because just as Dr. Jamison just said, when Rodney Hurst was 16, 17, 18 years old in the NAACP, he was leading these movements here in Jacksonville and all over the United States. Young people have been doing that for years. And so I'm interested in to know, to you, as soon as I can bring this up, here we go. Okay, in the wake of the civil unrest sparked by the murder of George Floyd, how has Juneteenth been more meaningful this year than any other time before? And what do you hope that people, whether it's the people of color, as well as people in the white community, what do you hope that they will gain from this moment and from this movement? And then anybody can chime in on the panelists after she's finished who feel led.
Well, I think that a lot of people in my generation, I was born in the year 2000. And so a lot of people in my generation, we don't know a lot of history. We just know that, you're not going to talk to me a certain way. You're not going to address me in this way. And we are very vocal. And, you know, I respect that about us, because I would be on Twitter, and Twitter has become this hub where like the news won't tell you what's going on. But people on Twitter, they're gonna come up there, they're gonna give it to you, they're gonna give their opinion, you're able to share what you believe. You can hear from a lot of different people, from a lot of perspectives, that you think you're battling this alone, but you'll see a whole thread and retweets and comments of people who are in this thing together. And I think that Twitter has become a platform where people can learn more. And so I believe that this Juneteenth has become a point of reflection. I don't think we've ever really reflected on what has this time been, you know, because I think school and the education system likes to make you believe that the civil rights movement happened a very long time ago, or that slavery was so long ago. I think people try to make it seem like that, but it really wasn't. You know, like my grandpa, me and him sit and talk. I live with him. Me and him sit and talk all the time, and he tells me about how when he was a child, his mom used to work for a white family, and they went to the beach together, Jacksonville Beach, and all these other white families made him get out the water and told him that he was making the water dirty, you know. And that's my grandpa telling me that story. And so people try to make it seem like that was so long ago, but it's not. And so I think that a lot of younger white people my age are starting to see really what's going on. Because, you know, I've seen a lot of white people be like, oh, I'm talking to my mom about what's going on. I'm talking to my dad about what's going on. I'm talking to my grandma about what's going on. And they just think that we're being upset for no reason about police brutality. Why would you take down the Confederate statues? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And I think it's the first time, you know, that kids my age are really getting an idea of the point that we're actually at and all the work that we really have to be doing. And that, you know, there are levels to this. The more you find out, you know that there are more and more levels. So I think that this time, you know, we need to stand together more than anything, because we're finally at a point where we can see what has been really going on, you know? So I think that we're at this point where everything is now finally on the table, like, you know, and no one can deny it. You can't deny what's going on. It's too in your face. And I think we needed that. I rip George Floyd, rip Rihanna, you know. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Any other panelists want to chime in? Will?
This Juneteenth, I think the unrest that has sparked in these past few weeks has been basically a black light to, and I'm of course echoing a lot of Kiara's sentiments, and I hope I don't sound too redundant, but I viewed it as a black light to quite a bit of casual racism, blatant racism, and even subliminal racism that we've become okay with in our country. And we were sort of operating at this level, you know, this plateau of like, oh, we don't think it's really hurting anybody, but, you know, it's okay. And I think that the slayings that we've seen in the past few weeks have presented the American public with a fundamental question. And I think it is either acknowledge that Black people are mistreated by not only the police, but American citizens simply for the color of their skin, or you have to admit that you don't care as much about the Black community as you do your own communities. And there are many people who are unwilling to admit to the latter. So I think that this has been important because it shook the fence a little bit. We had quite a few people who were very comfy sitting on the little chain link fence, and then they saw that, you know, there are dead bodies at the bottom of the fence, and that they have to do something about it because, you know, our people are dying, we're being killed. We're being killed while sleeping in our homes, you know? This has been insane. So I think that we are on the verge of something truly revolutionary, I think that we are on the verge of a new normal in which we actually acknowledge and honor the differences that are in our community as human beings, without putting down others because we don't understand, you know? I think that of course, it's just a coincidence that all this happened around Juneteenth, but I think that we are living in a very important time right now, and I'm so happy to be a part of this generation of human beings that's going to usher us into an era where we can actually find peace, because we're not judging people based on the color of their skin or injuring people based on the color of the skin or who they love. We have to stand up and recognize everyone as a human being who is deserving of their most basic rights, and that we cannot rob them of them because we would rather be comfortable. And I think that's all I have to say on that.
So I'll tell you, what I find very fascinating and what is exciting for me during this time is we are finding ourselves in the midst of young people who, as Wilford just said, does not really care about who people are. You all are very accepting. And so I came to my church, and I remember after being there a few Sundays, I remember there was a grandmother who came to me and said, "I am so happy you're here, because now I feel as though I can bring my granddaughter." Her granddaughter is biracial. And I remember she brought an 8x10 picture to church and showed this 8x10 picture of her beautiful granddaughter to me and to also my mom. And I started just really paying attention to how the face of our community is changing. The face of St. Augustine is very different. And we do find a number of different families. They're sprouting up within the community, a diversity that certainly when I was growing up was not aware was happening in St. Augustine. And so it certainly has prompted us to respond in a very different way. And so when I think about all of what is happening right now and right next door to Juneteenth, I'm thinking about how there's so many more people now who are and almost being prompted or almost being forced to respond, because my family is larger, the face of my family has changed. I have children who say, well, gosh, I have all these friends who are from the United Nations, and I just don't understand why we still are living in a day and a time where, certain people are not accepted in certain places. I believe that this particular time has also made us more aware of the cultural racism that is prevalent, also made us more aware of the institutional racism, and a lot of what is being discussed right now when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about the changes that need to happen, when we're talking about dismantling systems, it is around cultural and it is around institutional racism. And those are things that we've just not paid attention to. My friend, Pastor David, he often talks about as being a white man. He says, being a white man, I have just swam in the waters of racism, and much like fish don't even recognize they're swimming in the water. And I love that illustration that he shares. And so we've been kind of living in this place, not really realizing where we have been. I must admit, growing up in the 70s, as a child of the 70s, and kind of on the right on the edge of the civil rights. So I was very well aware of what has happened in the city, what had happened in Jacksonville, very well aware of civil rights and the struggle, very well aware of St. Augustine, which is why I never went there. My mom said, oh no. I mean, to this day, it's like, oh no, that's a bad place. We pray for you all the time because we know that's a bad place. And so certainly growing up as a child of the 70s, we were just kind of moving along. And I feel like we were kind of just swimming in the water, kind of, of what had already been set and laid aside for us. And actually, I think those of us who grew up in that time, Gen Xers, some of us, it's been like, hey, we thought you all handled this. We thought you really kind of handled all of this. And I don't know that we ever really paid attention to, with great detail, attention to the systems in place, the policies. We just kind of accepted it. I don't know that I've ever questioned the fact that it was a little problematic that Andrew Jackson High School is named Andrew Jackson High School. I don't know that I ever really questioned the monument that was in Hemmings Park. I never really questioned that because it was not something that I could even think about as actually being removed or renamed and changed. It was just, it is what it is, and we're just kind of going along. And so what this season of COVID has afforded us is this opportunity to actually pay attention. A lot of, so I'm working on this scripture for this Sunday, and it's really in this text when Jesus is talking about in Matthew 10. So in Matthew 10, Jesus is talking about what to be aware of, and he says, people, look, this is what's going to happen. People are going to harass you. And he talks a lot about listening, hearing, and using your voice. That if you are a part of the family, if you're going to be a part of doing what I'm doing, you're going to have to know that there are going to be some things that are going to come against you. And there's some responsibilities that you have. And so I find that we're in that place. We're at the steps. And we now have a responsibility. And what I tell my congregation, or what I told them a couple of weeks ago, was, I do what I do because I'm thinking about the children. Now, I don't have any children. I have, young cousins, but I think of all children as my children. I'm sorry, I get a little choked up about it. And I have a responsibility to leave the world or this place where I have lived, where I have breathed. I have a responsibility to leave it in a better place. And I really don't want my children, those who live in Jacksonville, St. Johns County, the children those who I engage with, people, who I know I have a responsibility for, I don't want to leave them with this. When I talk about what it means for me to be at my church, having to be the first African-American woman as well as an African-American person, that is such, it is an honor for me that God would think that I can do anything, that God says I can use you. But what I want to create is a better church community. I want First UMC to be known for more than what it has been known for, because I get an opportunity to experience them now, where they have had an opportunity to grow beyond 1968. And so even for those who may still be living there, that is my challenge, right? The challenge is I'm going to push you to move beyond where you have stayed. We all have to mature at some point. My responsibility is to grow us up as God is growing me up, right? And so I'm grateful that we're having this conversation about Juneteenth because, and I don't know if someone else said it, it's been long overdue for liberation. It's been long overdue for celebration. There is a frame on the wall of a homeless shelter that I used to serve in Atlanta. When you would walk in this place, it would say, and I can't remember who said this quote, if you have come here to liberate me, if you've come here to liberate me because you feel like you need to do that, then you've made the wrong decision basically to come. But if you come to liberate me because you recognize that your liberation is wrapped up in mine, then now we can get to work, right? It's something along those lines. I did not say it correctly, but that's what this is about. My liberation, I can't celebrate. And I believe Od'Juan said something like, I cannot celebrate until we are all free. I can't sleep good at night until we're all able to sleep good at night. I can't breathe adequately, right? Until we're all able to breathe adequately. But that requires the whole community. And so me being a Jesus person, that means that requires every living creature who was created by God to give voice to what it means to be one who loves God radically and love their neighbor just as radically. So, it's more than about what's happening in my little home, in my area, but it really is the much larger, bigger picture that we are being called to pay attention to. So.
Absolutely. That's outstanding. And just like you said, like, I think you hit it right on the nail when you just said, you can't sleep, you cannot be at rest until everybody, and that's the thing, that should not be the desire just for the people of color, the people of the African-American community. That should be the desire for everybody in the United States of America. So that we can,
more than enough.
Absolutely.
Right? There's more. We talk about this. There's more than enough at the table. And we have to move from this mentality of scarcity, as though if I share a little bit of my platform or my power with you, then I am devoid of something, that something has been snatched or taken from me. There is more than enough. I believe in communion. There's more than enough at the table. When Jesus laid out the table, he stretched the table to make sure everybody could come around the table. So, I'm sorry, I'm preaching. I'm sorry.
It's a good thing.
You're good at preaching. Hey, Rudy, did you want to answer this before we go to some participant comments and questions?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I promise I'll be brief. I think Reverend Jordan brings up another competing commitment, and that's spirituality, right? So I talked about capitalism. I talked about democracy. Now, when we bring faith into the equation, that is another competing commitment. Because if we're going to practice capitalism the way capitalism has always been practiced, there's no room for faith, right? So when we start to think about that, this is not a zero-sum game. Because I win doesn't mean you lose. I mean, we are operating in abundance.
Yes.
And the answer to the question of how of what's your number, it shouldn't be more. Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and philosophy, wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And pedagogy simply means teaching strategy, right? And in the book, he posits that it is the responsibility of the oppressed to free themselves. He also posits that it is the responsibility of the oppressed to free their oppressor. Now, as a Black man, upon reading that submission, my initial inclination is how can I free myself, much less free those people who are in control of the institutions in which I live. But what I am beginning to understand is, I'm beginning to understand that there's agency in the struggle. I bring a level of social, community, and spiritual capital that economic capital cannot buy. Economic capital cannot purchase, right? And what I'm finding is I'm finding the agentic authority in that. And organizations, people, institutions need that. One thing that I think we need to consider, and I'll shut up, is I think we need to consider when we talk about youth, it's easy for youth to be liberal. It's easy for youth to be hopeful. It's easy for youth to protest. It's easy for youth to resist, right? But once they get into the world of work, once mom and dad are not cutting that check anymore, they have a decision to make. And that is a huge risk. Once they start to have children and buy houses and buy cars and become a slave to those material things, they got a decision to make that comes with the risk. I work at the University of North Florida, right? And it's a risk walking in that building, resisting racism every day. But that is an existential reality to me. I cannot wake up and not resist. But I take that risk every day. And my job is on the table. One slight misstep, and I'm not in the in-group anymore. I don't have the air cover, right, to seek justice. I don't have the air cover to ask the hard questions. I don't have the air cover to suggest that that was racism. And that's difficult. So when we talk about racial equity and social justice, we need abolitionist allies to help us in this work. We need you to be invested in it as much as we are. We need you to be taking some risk with us. We cannot turn a blind eye, deaf ear, or silent tongue to this work. This is hard work, and this is hard work. We can't intellectualize it. We got to deal with the real emotions. We got to deal with our reality, where we're situated in these systems of order, and how can we enact sustainable change. And that's tough. But once again, I hope we can approach this work in the spirit of love, hope, courage, and agency.
Yeah. Thank you, Rudy. And I just think, this is what we're talking about with Juneteenth, right? The freedom has not marched far enough yet. So let's keep on marching. All right, well, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want us to finish on time here, but I want to give our participants who, we thank you so much for tuning in with our wonderful panelists. I want to give you a chance, if you have a brief comment of encouragement or solidarity or something you connected to, we do ask you to keep it brief because we do want to keep, we do want to finish in about 10 minutes. But if you would like to make a comment, if you would like to speak, if you would raise your hand physically so we can see it, and that way Emma can unmute you, because I don't think you'll be able to unmute yourself. So I see Suzanne. So we'll go to Suzanne first, and then anybody else who had a hand, put that up so I can see it, and we'll come to you after Suzanne.
Just speaking as a woman who has been Christian, and I've been on this earth a while. Juana's my pastor, unofficially. And I thought back today, I thought, in so many ways, God's timing, the Amish have a saying, say, the mills of God grind exceedingly slow, but they grind exceedingly fine indeed. And I remember as a Christian, when Bill Clinton finally came out and confessed that he'd done the deed, there wasn't one evangelical white pastor that stood with him. But on that stage, there were 6 or 7 African-American pastors that stood with him. And everybody else was running backwards as fast as they could and judging. And our dear friend, Tony Campola, has had an orphanage in Haiti for decades. And he's white, all of the funding for his orphanages dried up because he stood with Bill Clinton. And I thought, wow, doesn't the Bible, I couldn't put those two together. Then Charleston happened, and that was so shocking. And a day and a half later, the judge brought that man to court, and the family members who had been murdered, not each one of them, but almost all of them said, I don't like it, I don't feel it, but I'm forgiving you because that's what my Lord wants me to do, and I do forgive you. And I thought that was the most profound Christian example that I have seen. I think that should be a national holiday. And the people at my church roll their eyes because I'm always like, we need to celebrate. That was a sermon like no sermon the evangelical church has seen in my lifetime. I've never seen anything like that. That was unbelievable. Then we get a 3 or 4 month pandemic, and all of a sudden people aren't just on to the next thing on. We've had a timeout. God gave us a 3-month timeout, and all of a sudden people can sort of think and sort of feel, and they're not just crossing things off their list because we've had this timeout. And then we had to watch a man murdered in real time, and there was no escaping it. And I think God's hand is on the way things are coming together. And I feel like, that as I watch and you think, where is God in all of this? Well, I feel like things are unfolding in his slow time. Read a book several years ago about it's about a Middle Eastern concept of you make your enemy love you, and then when they love you, then their heart breaks for what they did to you. And I think this is a moment of sweet revenge in our country, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say. Other than Oprah says the biggest mistake that could be made at this time right now is to not ask for enough.
Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate your comment. I see Julia.
Hear me? Okay, I'm a person of very few words, but I was raised here in Jacksonville, and my dad was born here in Jacksonville and came from Georgia stock. And he and mother tried real hard to teach us to be loving Christians that were, quote, blind to color. And going now through this Me and White Supremacy book, you know, I realize how I'm not blind to color. I just have learned to live with the privileges that I have, which have been enormous. And I think that there are a lot, I'm 73, I think there are a lot of us who are just now getting our eyes opened in a different way. And it may take us a long time, but I'm hearing people around me saying, you know, I want to try to figure this out. And that's all I wanted to share, but just to let you know, there are people like me who are pretty silent, but we're working on it. So thank you.
That's good. That's good. Real quick, Matt, just to touch on what she's talking about, right? She said something to me that's very profound. She said she has lived with this great amount of privilege. And what's important, what is so important to the white community to understand is you don't have to be racist, but understand that you have benefited from it all your life just because you are white. You know, so if we say like white privilege, or if we say, you know, something along those lines, it's not, we're not trying to be demeaning, we're not trying to be mean, we're just saying that even though you may not be a racist person, you very well may not be, but believe me when we tell you that you have benefited because of this systematic racism that's in this country. Just because of the color of your skin, you have benefited from that. And if you can see that, then you will be able to use that. You will be able to use that privilege to fight for everyone else to get the same privilege that you've been afforded. So that is a very profound word and a very profound insight that you have come to notice, and that is outstanding.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Lisa Crowder, and then we're going to go into our final song.
Thanks, Matt. My name's Lisa. I'm a white Jewish woman married to a Black Native American man, almost 30 years. And I have a 22-year-old Jewish Black son. And these conversations we've had our entire marriage. We have had people refuse to seat us, serve us. My husband and son have been profiled going into stores. So this is something that we have to teach our children how people are treated. And I really enjoyed the conversation tonight. and all of the efforts this organization has made around Jacksonville to bring people together. I also work in law enforcement, and I think that the conversation that's happening today in America, although it's very difficult and they're hard conversations, it's very important because people are learning from each other, they're listening, and I don't think they can help not doing it because it's in their face now, and it's hard to walk away from because people are seeing how much damage has been done to Black Americans. And I think also around the world, people are seeing it. And you look on the news in different countries and people are speaking out. So I just wanted to thank you all for speaking tonight and sharing your stories, and keep doing it. It's good. It's good, and it's helping repair the world. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to make one comment before everything ends, and I just wanted to say that, you know, this movement that's happening here in the United States is giving inspiration around the world to, you know, people who have been victims, you know, of capitalism and, you know, colonization and just having their rights taken away. So when we're fighting for Black liberation, you know, I'm sure someone else has touched on it too, but we're fighting, you know, for the freedom of everyone. And so this is a beautiful moment to be a part of.
It is. Thank you, Kiara. And thank you, Lisa. All right, so friends, thank you. We're going to finish with a song here in a moment. After we finish the song, we'll disperse. Will's going to lead us in that in just one moment. But before we end, we've brought you this event from the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida. We'd love for you, if you're not familiar with us, if you came at this from some other angle, to follow us on Facebook or look up our website, Interfaith, nefl.org. We try to do these events that bring together cultural and religion across the city. We will send out a follow-up email. So if you registered for this, we will share resources. We know that Rudy shared some resources with us. We want to share with you about what Od'Juan's doing with Faith in Public Life, and what Kiara is doing with the Jacksonville Community Action Council. Yeah. And other resources as well, maybe some of the music that Will sang. So we will do a follow-up email to share those resources with you. And we thank each one of you, and I thank panelists. Thank you for your wisdom, your time, your expertise. It was truly an honor. All right, Will.
All right. Yeah, so this last piece is called Resilience. It's by Abby Battinas, and I think its lyrics are very appropriate for the current climate. Resilience, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on. Resilience, make a new plan, stand up again and say, yes, we can. Resilience, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on. Resilience, make a new plan, stand up again and say, yes, we can. Oh, we are strong, hold on. I wanna make it and I know we will. Yes, it's hard to keep going, but it's worse to stand still. Oh, we are strong, hold on. I wanna make it and I know we will. Yes, it's hard to keep going, but it's worse to stand still. Resilience.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you very much, Will. Thank you very much to our panelists. We hope to see you again at one of our future events. We'll be in touch. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night. Good night.
Good night.